To all of you friends of the American Friends of the Humboldt Foundation. My name is Christian Hähnel. I'm the president and CEO of the American Friends of the Alexander von Humboldt Foundation. We are an American 501c3 and the professional partner of the German Alexander von Humboldt Foundation. The Humboldt Foundation, as many of you know, promotes global exchange and collaboration of scientists and researchers. There are over 30,000 Humboldtians, Humboldt alumni worldwide, a few of them among us today. About 6,000 Humboldtians live and work in the United States alone. Thousands of great minds and influential voices in various fields. Alexander von Humboldt did not believe in borders, neither between nations nor between disciplines. And this is reflected in the academic, professional, and geographic diversity of the Humboldt network. Humboldtians are our biggest asset in putting together transatlantic programs with which we're trying to contribute to tackling the most pressing challenges our societies are facing on either side of the Atlantic and worldwide. Challenges such as global warming, energy security, public health, AI governance, and so forth. For us as an organization, this is a very significant year. It's the 25th anniversary of American Friends of the Alexander von Humboldt Foundation. And to celebrate this, we're very much looking forward to kicking off a new program today, New Perspectives on Humboldt. It is going to be a hopefully interactive speaker series with Humboldt experts who take us on deep dives of Humboldt's legacy and his relevance for today. Alexander von Humboldt, of course, is an essential part of our brand. And we claim to follow, or to try to follow a little bit in his footsteps with our work. With our new program, we want to showcase the relevance of Humboldt's legacy for tackling the global issues of today. And therefore, we want to provide fresh perspectives on the historical figure, his work, and his achievements. The idea is to put a spotlight on aspects of Humboldt's legacy that are not too well known yet, in the sense of what you did not know about Alexander von Humboldt and why it matters today. With our new program, we also want to make a small, if we can, a small contribution in countering a seemingly omnipresent trend of polarization. These days, ever more fields of life are getting polarized. Politics, societal discourse, even historical science. When it comes to Alexander von Humboldt, there are works today that provide polar opposite images of him. There are those traditional perceptions who praise Humboldt as the great explorer, the greatest explorer of all time, who brought immense knowledge and understanding to humanity. And then there are others, so-called post-colonial views, maybe sometimes even a little bit woke, going overboard. These views see Humboldt as just having been another white man who conquered, appropriated, and oppressed. With our new program, we neither want to put Humboldt on a pedestal, nor do we want to take him down from one. We're interested in the facts. We're curious to shed light on the nuances, and we're keen to provide new perspectives. And we're very happy and honored to have Sandra Rebok, who's kind of hidden behind me there, but she will be in the spotlight very soon. There she is. Sandra Rebok, who is a fellow, Dr. Sandra Rebok, who is a fellow at the Center for U.S.-Mexican Studies at the School of Global Policy and Strategy at the University of California, San Diego. Trained as an anthropologist and sociologist, she works in the field of history of modern science, doing research that crosses the boundaries, very Humboldtian, of nations and disciplines. Her approach is at once social, cultural, and intellectual. Sandra has always been attracted to studying voyages of exploration, as a mode of the production of knowledge, as well as to international forms of scholarly collaboration as the vehicles for the circulation of knowledge on a larger scale. Much of her scholarship in the last 25 some years has focused on the figure of Alexander von Humboldt. The title of Sandra's lecture today is Navigating Between Science and Politics, Humboldt and Early Science Diplomacy. Sandra will suggest to look at Humboldt as an early advocate of science diplomacy. He knew that he needed to go beyond scholarly circles in order to turn a science into applicable knowledge, connecting it with the needs of society. He had to reach out to politicians, diplomats, policymakers, and practitioners in order to further scientific and technological progress through a skillful connection of different interests. Sandra will base her argument on her over 2.5 decades of research in the field, both in Europe and in America. She will show us in which way such a new perspective of Humboldt can be relevant and also, and especially, relevant in today's discourse in science, politics, and society. After Sandra's presentation, we will have a Q&A session. For those of you joining virtually, please put your questions to the chat. And followed by the Q&A, we will have a reception. The bar is already open. The food is over there. And it's good, I can tell you. I did some sample testing. Before I come to an end, I want to point out that this event is sponsored in part by Cosmos Circle member support. The Cosmos Circle is made up of sustaining supporters who contribute monthly, annually, and biannually to support our programming at American Friends of the Alexander von Humboldt Foundation. You too, if that has not happened yet, can join the Cosmos Circle by scanning the QR code on one of these little cards that are all over the place on the tables, and by visiting the link in the chat for our virtual guests. We rely on charitable support to produce programs like this. Sponsorship opportunities are available and flexible. And to learn more about becoming a Cosmos Circle member or event sponsorship, please reach out to us 24/7, 365. We're available for your inquiries on that one. But now, I want to say, again, thank you very much for coming. We really appreciate taking the time, showing your interest by sharing this inaugural lecture of the New Perspectives on Humboldt speaker series with us. Let's turn to Dr. Sandra Rebok now. Sandra, thank you very much again for being with us today. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone here in the room who was able to join us, also to those who join us virtually. I am thrilled to be here. I would like to thank in the first place the American Friends of the Alexander von Humboldt Foundation for inviting me and for giving me the opportunity to talk about the topic that I have been intrigued with since many years, and this is Humboldt's navigation between the sciences and the politics. So when we first started talking about the possibility to do something together, I was excited about the fact that I saw that our ideas regarding this event were quite aligned, and you will see that my presentation here is quite connected to what Christian just presented. So I'm excited to launch this new series, and I'm excited to be here in Washington. In fact, since several years, I have been advocating for a new approach to the life and legacy of Alexander von Humboldt, an approach that is less polarizing, an approach that is more fact-based and less ideology-based, an approach that leads to new research using original sources, aiming to a better understanding of those aspects of Humboldt that have led to questions, to concerns, or even to misunderstandings. In my eyes, Alexander von Humboldt's connections to the world of politics is one of these topics that require more attention. Humboldt's nearness to the political world has led to a broad array of criticism and misinterpretations. While some saw him as an ideological leader of the Spanish-American independence movement, others took him as being yet another explorer at the service of empires. While some saw in him an agent for the Spanish king Charles IV, others criticized him for acting as a spy for President Thomas Jefferson. In other words, Humboldt's skillful navigation between the pursuits of science and the pursuits of politics, how he managed to further his scientific agenda by connecting it to the political power, needs a closer look. Before doing so, I would like to offer a very brief introduction to Humboldt in case not everyone here is well familiar with Humboldt's life and legacy. He was born in 1769, the same year as Napoleon. He was born in Berlin, and Alexander von Humboldt has become famous as a Prussian naturalist and explorer, but he is much more. He was much more than that. He was also a historian. He was a social scientist, a science manager, and much more. He has been, or still is, mostly famous for the scientific expedition he carried out in the Spanish possessions in the New World during the years 1799 to 1804. Here, it's important to be aware of the rather exceptional character of this expedition. In a time when scholars mostly carried out their scientific pursuits forming part of larger exploration voyages, financed and directed by political powers, Humboldt undertook this endeavor in a rather independent way. He obtained an extremely generous authorization by the Spanish Empire for his own voyage, which was financed by his own economic means. That is important. And he was therefore able to follow his own scientific agenda. Having had a privileged upbringing in a wealthy aristocratic family in Berlin, with close ties to the Prussian court, Humboldt received not only an excellent education in different areas of knowledge, but also a notable heritage which allowed him to pursue his own goals. And these were to study and measure and understand the world and every component of it with their complex interdependencies. The itinerary of this American expedition comprised what today are the countries of Cuba, Venezuela, Ecuador, Colombia, Peru, Mexico, followed by a brief visit to Philadelphia and Washington just before returning back to Europe. During the rest of his life, he was busy with the elaboration of the results of his exploration voyage. He was busy preparing his publications, numerous publications, with the different translations to other languages, and also the lectures that he offered. In his later years, when he was 60, he undertook another large exploration voyage through Russia, yet under very different circumstances. His legacies are a large number of annotations. For example, we have his travel diaries that became famous because there's a big project in Berlin where they're editing the travel diaries, but also his letters. He brought a lot of collections of plants, of minerals. So it's a large legacy that he brought, which also includes very interesting observations regarding the different society that he encountered. That's why I don't want to take him also only as a natural scientist. He was also, a sociologist, a historian. He was very much interested in describing the societies and also the difficulties, the challenges of the societies, but also the evils of his times, like slavery, for example, is something that he very much into it and analyzing and criticizing it, of course. So all that gives us a glimpse into colonial Spanish America right before the independence movement started. The legacy of Humboldt, the question of what he is known for, what do we owe him, or which are his most important achievements, has, however, raised many discussions. Particularly in recent years, around 2019, when we were celebrating his 250th anniversary, there were very different voices. So yes, as Christian already mentioned, there's a glorifying position. There were many hagiographic interpretations of Humboldt, who created a hero, a precursor of our modern sciences, someone to whom many discoveries or original scientific concepts were falsely ascribed. So for example, he was taken as the first environmentalist, the first global networker, the first global thinker, and much more. On the other side, we have an overly critical position. And yeah, these are people that questions what his contributions to science were. They claimed, for example, that there was no significant theory that had been developed by Humboldt, that he did not make any important discoveries, and there are a lot of people who say that he basically drew from the work of other people. So about these opposing views, I could say a lot, but it is not the topic of the presentation today. So what I would like to focus on today is, in the context of this particular event, is his ties to the political context in which his work was carried out. And I also would like to focus on the different interpretations that can be found and the conclusions to which I have come in my analysis. As mentioned, while Humboldt became famous for the vast body of knowledge that he created on the natural world, on the societies, or the societies living in them, he was also criticized for the way he navigated the world of politics and diplomacy in his position as self-financed and independent explorer. All too often, Humboldt is portrayed as a mere pinball among competing political interests, or else in a more active role as an agent willing to provide his knowledge to the strategic benefits of one nation, or if not, as an opportunist willing to do anything for his personal benefit. Interestingly, most of his criticism has focused, and still does focus, on his connection to the Spanish Empire on one side and the United States on the other. As I said before, on one side he is being seen as a tool at the service of the Spanish Empire, or else as a spy or an agent for the United States, for Thomas Jefferson. Some take him as a revolutionary. They think that he has been the ideological leader of the Spanish independence movement, while others depict him as another European colonial explorer. So we see that it's not only a lot of criticism from different angles, it's also obviously a contradiction. He can be criticized for one thing or the other, but the interesting thing with Humboldt is he's being criticized from all these different angles, but with contradicting criticism. So let's have a closer look at that. First of all, to avoid any misunderstandings, Humboldt was none of these things. These are rather superficial interpretations, many times based on a lack of knowledge regarding the socio-political context of his work or his exploration voyages, or a lack of willingness to dive deeper into the analysis. Sometimes they're also rather motivated by ideological interests, and if this is something of interest for you, we can talk about this later. Humboldt was far from being a mere pinball of political interests, nor were his goals limited to furthering his own scientific agenda by connecting it with the political power. Aware of the benefit of being at the intersection of both science and politics, Humboldt rather sought to combine these two different aspects and spheres of interest. Over the years, he found multiple ways to address the needs and challenges of his time by strengthening the ties between both worlds. What is less known, though, is the fact that he undertook much of these efforts mainly in connection to the Prussian court, and not in alliance with the Spanish crown or the US cabinet, as this criticism depicts him. So let's have a look at that. I look at Humboldt as an unofficial Prussian envoy in this context. It was in November 1805, after a 9-year absence from Berlin, and more than 1 year after having ended his American endeavor, when Humboldt returned to his native Prussia. The Prussian court was well aware of his growing fame and eager to strengthen its connection to its now famous citizen. Humboldt immediately received official honors, such as being named court chamberlain, which came along with a considerable economic remuneration. Over the next decade, the scholar turned into diplomat would develop a close relationship with the Prussian crown, lending his intellectual fame and cosmopolitan glamour to the court. Humboldt's close relationship with the higher scholarly and political circles, particularly in Washington, London, and Paris, made him an excellent diplomatic representative for the monarchy. He would thus receive, over a long period of time, numerous official tasks, some in the context of the more imminent political interest of the court, some concerning broader strategic goals. He tended to comply diligently with all of them, though generally not without an eye on connecting them with his own pursuits. In October 1807, for instance, when a commission was formed to reorganize the Academy of Science in Berlin after the Napoleonic Wars and the French invasion of Prussia, Humboldt was asked to act as president of the society and to draft his suggestions for a practical and social use of science. This was surely an agreeable duty for Humboldt, since he gave him an early chance to develop his interest as a patron of science. The following month, he left on an unofficial mission to accompany Prince Wilhelm, the king's younger brother, on a trip to Paris in order to negotiate a reduction of the war compensation that that Napoleon had imposed after the Prussian-French War. Based on his reputation and his close ties to France, it was hoped that this could facilitate a more favorable outcome of those negotiations. In terms of his own negotiations, he had achieved that he was allowed to stay in his beloved Paris, the center of sciences in Europe back then. And there he was allowed to stay he stayed there for 2 decades to elaborate the fruits of his American expedition. Paris was really the place where you needed to be, because this is where the scientists was most advanced, map makers, the publications he needed, newest, latest scientific instruments, everything he had it there. That's why he wanted to be in Paris. A few years later, in 1814, Humboldt acted as Friedrich Wilhelm III's companion in his travels to Paris and London, and in 1818, 4 years later, he was charged with another important mission to the Congress of Aix-la-Chapelle, where, as usual, he aimed to combine his official political task with his scholarly goals. In this instance, he took advantage of the occasion and the chance to encounter in person different key people to further his own planned Asian expedition and to discuss funding opportunities. So this is another example how he connected both interests. So there were many other diplomatic delegations that Humboldt accompanied over the next years. And so these official missions clearly also suited Humboldt's own purpose. Being well known within the highest political circles in Europe further augmented his influence and prestige. His service to the crown would give him the chance to extend his networks through additional connections, which in turn were often advantageous for his own scholarly projects. Given his charismatic and extremely social nature, Humboldt certainly also enjoyed the attention he received in different countries while carrying out his diplomatic mission. Moreover, forming part of the king's official entourage was a welcome opportunity for him to travel comfortably at a point of his life when his own shrinking financial assets no longer afforded him these luxury conditions. Also, these tours allowed him to undertake his own abbreviated scientific excursion from the places the delegation visited, for instance, for geological or mineralogical purposes, for archival studies, or simply to visit nearby scholars or institutions. For this combination of reasons, Humboldt took his mission seriously and created an extended series of diplomatic reports. This, for example, is something that is hardly known, this aspect of him. However, it's important to know that these reports were only informative in nature, since he was never an accredited representative of Prussia like his brother Wilhelm von Humboldt, who did serve as an official diplomat in Rome and Vienna. Alexander merely informed situational obligations, while his position did not allow him to exert direct influence on decision-making processes. My argument, however, is that much more than just benefiting from being drawn into the world of diplomacy, I see Humboldt as an early advocate of science diplomacy. Though the term science diplomacy, which has lately received a growing attention, as such is relatively recent, the fruitful yet challenging connection between the pursuits of science and politics has a long history. The past provides numerous examples of institutions and individuals aware of the chances and opportunities that this combination of fields of interest generates, particularly in the 18th and 19th century, inspired by the postulates of enlightenment, along with a new understanding of the sciences and its role in society. A growing number of people practice what we consider to be science diplomacy avant la lettre. Well known, for example, is the important role of the Royal Society, the British role of Royal Society in this context as one of the oldest academies of science, or the efforts of eminent personalities like Benjamin Franklin or Thomas Jefferson. So also Humboldt was in the position to make things happen, to connect people, ideas, and funds in order to initiate projects, to establish contacts with publishers, to promote publications and translations, to forge ties to politicians and policymakers, to undertake successful expeditions, and even to facilitate the creation of scientific institutions. This is where he was at his best, as catalyst for developments, as a source of inspiration or a model to follow for others, and in a position that connected the concerns of science with the pursuit of politics in multiple ways, which we today summarize under the concept science diplomacy, meaning creating synergy between the pursuits of both worlds by using connections to politics to further scientific projects, or vice versa, by making use of diplomatic connections to channel information, or by promoting scientific projects beyond national interests. Humboldt knew that he needed to look beyond scholarly circles if he sought to turn his science into applicable knowledge and connect it in a meaningful way with the needs of society. For this purpose, he had to reach out to the political powers at play, the politicians, diplomats, policymakers, practitioners of his times, in order to further scientific and technological progress by skillfully establishing ties between the interests of both worlds. Humboldt clearly did not want to be at the service of politics in the sense of having a political position. That he clearly did not want. He did not even want to have a position, like a fixed position in science. So he wanted to be independent, also from politics. Yet he understood the benefits of being at the intersections of the both fields and to create synergies between different interests. Over the years, he found multiple ways to bridge the two worlds. He addressed the needs and challenges of his time by strengthening the ties, by actively establishing diplomatic contacts to facilitate international scientific operation and to undertake large-scale science projects. And he was successful in his mission. Individuals and officials provided him with all kinds of information, including information that could be considered confidential. Information tended to gain value when it was passed through Humboldt. It was considered more reliable when it was associated to him. Favors were carried out in a quicker way and more thoroughly when his name was connected to them. People responded quickly and were willing to act at his request. Institutions and even nations were eager to be connected to his ambitious projects for the modernizations of the sciences. It seemed to be quite a privilege to be part of his, or what I call, his global and powerful empire of knowledge, which over the years, with his prestige still growing, would become ever more influential. With his outstanding social skills, Humboldt was indeed the ideal person in this position as early science diplomat. Those who had the pleasure of meeting him frequently described him as an extremely charismatic, as a blessed character with great charm. He tended to be at the center of all social gatherings he attended, where he entertained the other guests with his impressive wealth of knowledge, his far-sighted analysis, and also with the way he established the connections between people and ideas, institutions, and nations. These skills also proved indispensable in drawing attention to the goals that he pursued and the matters that he furthered, whether for societal benefit or for the sake of the scientific progress, or both. In short, Humboldt had much to offer. His international and highly influential networks, a growing body of exclusive and latest state-of-the-art knowledge, and his cosmopolitan and apparently very persuasive personality. In his deep convictions about what he understood as his mission in life, Humboldt turned his personal assets, which means his private funds, his broad expertise, and his influential connections, into a resource for the public good, for the advancement of science, and the political goals that were aligned with his enlightened values. I hope I have been able to contribute with these new insights to a better understanding of Humboldt in the context of his times as well as our times, and hopefully also to a more nuanced interpretation of Humboldt beyond black and white interpretations. Yeah, so there are many shades of gray beyond these two polarizing views. So this is an approach that Humboldt himself applied to the topics that were of interest to him. He always tried to pursue a well-balanced and nuanced approach, evidence-based, and viewed from different perspectives, connecting different sources of knowledge. And this is precisely where I think that he can still be inspiring for us today and for our times, where polarizing opinions, many times without a solid fundament, or also without the needed, let's say, openness towards other perspectives, seems to be on the rise. This is where this new series, New Perspectives on Humboldt, promises to make a relevant contribution to the understanding of Humboldt's life and legacy, but also to today's discourse in science, politics, and society. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Sandra, for this insightful presentation.
Thank you for making it possible.
Of course, I was surprised to hear so much about his great social skills. I remember this one quote from Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, who once said something along the lines of, Humboldt would speak, or you could listen to Humboldt, and in 1 hour he would tell you more, you will learn more from him in 1 hour than from other people in a week or so, but that also implies that he would talk nonstop for an hour, right?
That is what some people have complained when they met with him, that he was basically talking a lot. Yeah. So I think he had all this knowledge, his wealth of knowledge, and on the other side, he was not shy. So he did enjoy being with people, talking and sharing his knowledge. So yes, that's what many people have said. So sometimes when you think like, who's the historic person that you would like to share a moment with and get to know more? Yes, in my case, I admit it would be Alexander von Humboldt.
Okay, learned something there. Before I open the floor to questions from the audience here in DC and at home or wherever you are at the screens joining us virtually, I would like to start with one or two questions. We briefly talked about, and you also mentioned that the opposite images that are out there on Humboldt, either put him on a pedestal or try to bring him down. If I understand correctly, you have some very personal experience, professional experience, being in the middle of that kind of exchange on what the right view of Humboldt would be. When not too long ago, one of your latest works was about to get published. There was some controversy you had to face in order to get it published because it received some opposition of some of the extremes of that spectrum. Maybe you want to share with us, if that's okay, what that was all about. If you could
No, there are several things I can say about it. So what I did notice is in the last years, and especially in the context of the 2019 commemoration, which was largely celebrated on both sides of the Atlantic and beyond, also in other countries. So there are a lot of publications came out, a lot of discussions you could read about Humboldt. For some people, even more than you wanted to, because it was quite present. Yeah. But what I kind of criticized is that there was, on one side, those people who, who constantly I could see, oh, Humboldt, the first environmentalist. He was always the first, the first networker, the first who talked about climate change. And all that is not true. It's just putting him a label on him. And on the other side, there are other people who sometimes they criticize him, as I mentioned before. So there have been some people, even at an event like this, I was asked by someone, well, if Humboldt had, let's say, an unfortunate encounter with a crocodile, when he was touring the rivers in South America, so what would have been changed? So if we wouldn't have returned, so what is it what he really changed in science? Is there any change? Did he make any contribution? So that is something that needs to be addressed, and this, and I'm going to say something more about it. But this also, in the latest societal conversation, let's say with we can also call it sometimes wokeness, where you have to be really, really careful your arguments and whom you study, etc. So yes, I have received criticism. So how can you work about a white man, a white man with property, and then colonial explorer, so he was a tool of the empires, he served imperialism, etc. And so while I do, and I invite to have a critical approach to Humboldt. With critical, I mean, let's look at the things, let's look at the sources. Let's, for example, if we say he was a tool of the Spanish Empire, so yes, we can just repeat it, and it has been repeated over and over. But then what I said, and that's a bit what my claim is, so let's have a look at his connections, his ties to the Spanish Empire. What were his connections? What were the conditions under which he got this permission? What exactly was the permission? What was he allowed to do? What is it what he was not allowed to do? What were his expectations of the Spanish crown? And did he comply with that? So that's a bit what I mean. Like really let's go to the sources and answer that. Or the other question is, he has been criticized a lot for passing information to Thomas Jefferson, and yes, he did pass information, and still today, when, for example, when you go to Mexico, there is a lot of criticism. But then I say, let's look at the information. Let's look what he really passed to Jefferson, and why did he so? Because I have heard that he sold the information to Jefferson, or it was because of the information that Humboldt passed to Jefferson. So that's why the United States, 40 years later, could invade Mexico. So this is not true at all. But sometimes what happens with these arguments is they get perpetuated, and then people don't really look at the sources or the reasons for it, and they just repeat it. So that is something that I have heard. And also in the context of the 2019 commemoration, I was quite involved in that, and I did, for example, I did a study for the German Institute for Foreign Affairs. So together with the Institute for Foreign International Relations, because with the Office for Foreign Affairs, there was the idea, and I think this idea was really, really good. So it was together with the embassies. So it was a really good idea, because I said, instead of just starting to do any type of activities in Latin America on Humboldt to commemorate the anniversary, what we should do is to study how Humboldt is being perceived today in different places, and why are there differences? Why is he perceived differently in Cuba compared to Mexico, for example, and what are the historical reasons for that? So that's why I have been quite exposed to all types of different interpretations of Humboldt. And for example, if I may add this, because I think it's a good example how this can be solved. So some people, as I said before, say so many concepts, so many scientific developments, they go back to Humboldt. Humboldt was the first to mention that, or Humboldt. And there has been a debate in Colombia where there was a local scholar, a naturalist, José Francisco de Caldas, who passed a lot of information to Humboldt, passed him a lot of information, and then, of course, on the Colombian side, if we go there and say, oh, Humboldt was the first to develop the concept of the geography of plants, yeah, it was his ideas, it's wrong, yeah, and it's wrong from the perspective of history, science, but it's also wrong from the perspective of, let's say, cultural diplomacy or science diplomacy, because going there. So what the embassy, the German embassy in Colombia did, is for me the most elegant way how to solve that. So what they did is they created a medal, which is for German-Colombian collaboration, yeah, because they basically said, we are not going to find out who passed exactly which ideas to whom, and it doesn't matter. The important thing is there has been a constructive collaboration, and that is what we celebrate, that is what we commemorate, and that is now a medal that I think every 2 years a scholar can obtain that medal. So I think that is an excellent way how to solve that.
Thank you very much, Sandra. One last question from me. You made it pretty clear that you do not like to put labels on Humboldt or other historical figures, Humboldt being the first this or that. But those labels, they work so well marketing-wise, especially for an organization like ours. So I have to admit, even confess, that I like to label Alexander von Humboldt every now and then in the programs I participate in as the first science diplomat. Yeah. I immediately face opposition from American friends, not the American friends of Humboldt, who say, hey, how about Benjamin Franklin? So please, Sandra, help me, or don't help me, build the argument. Where would you position yourself? What would you say? The layperson might think that Franklin was a scientist first and then a proper diplomat later, whereas Humboldt was playing all roles and avoiding labels himself. So can you help us in our marketing venture in making a case for Humboldt being the first science diplomat? And if not, we might just quickly proceed to the next question.
Yes, this is something that we have been talking about when we were preparing the event, because yes, there was this label, the first science diplomat. And again, I said, no, he wasn't the first. So I know it's very easy for the marketing. And for example, they have been, again, in the context of the 2019 commemoration, in several places I have been interviewed, and then they wrote an article about what they had understood as my opinion, and since I was explaining we should not put these labels on him, it's wrong, and it's not helpful. I mean, as I said, from the perspective of history of science, it's wrong, and also from the perspective of cultural diplomacy, it's wrong. And then the article says, Humboldt, the first global thinker, like just the opposite of what I've said. So I protested, and the argument was always the same. Yeah, but it sells better. Yeah, people read this, and then they get attracted to it. I know. There we have maybe, I wouldn't say competing interests, but we look at the things from different angles. Like I. Let's say, as a serious scholar, I don't want to use these labels. I understand that maybe as an institution you have a different perspective, but yes, of course, if you say the first, then here in the U.S. people immediately say, what about Benjamin Franklin? What about Thomas Jefferson? And I'm a fellow at the Center for U.S. Mexican Studies in California, but right now, for 2 months, I am at the International Center for Jefferson Studies in Virginia. So there, I have to be very careful. I cannot say, oh no, Humboldt was the first who, for example, who recorded the weather, and then I say, wait a moment, look at Jefferson's weather recordings. Yeah, this is when Jefferson, for example, there's a famous quote when he says, well, I've been observing the weather, and I see that the weather has been changing gradually, and we are wondering what could be the sources or what has motivated it, but we have observed it, etc. And this was long before Humboldt. And so I think when you look at Humboldt, and this is also how I try to explain him, Humboldt, so many people have drawn from Humboldt. But Humboldt also drew from so many people, and he says it. Yeah? So he says it, for example, this is something in different talks. So when I talk more about the legacy of Humboldt, for example, I've seen I found some quotes that I like to use. For example, quotes where he says, it's in the Spanish chroniclers of the 16th century where I found like the nucleus of the ideas that I have developed further. They already described this idea or that idea. I don't want to go into specifics, but he says it very, very clearly where he got his ideas from, and he says, well, this is the origin of what I'm thinking. I found it there. So this is what Humboldt did. He read a lot, and then he absorbed it, and he developed it further. Of course, he did not do what people also criticize him, just copying from others. No. So what he did was drawing together material from different sources to get what I just said before, a more nuanced understanding from different sources, different material, different perspectives. And then he analyzed it, he compared it, he brought it further to a different level, so it's not just copying. But he did draw a lot from other people, like, for example, Caldas, as I mentioned before, but that's just one example among many others. So I don't know if this is helpful. It's like my perspective. Maybe also because, let's say in scholarship, there's one term for doing precisely that, and that is called firsting, and that is precisely when we say wherever, the first person who has been there usually is a white man, because we don't consider indigenous people who had been there before as, I don't know, people who have been there before. so that is called firsting, and it's being criticized. So I think I absorbed also this critical perspective, and I think we have to be careful. But I mean, I do understand, and this is another thing that I also explain many times in this context, that especially in the context of this commemoration, people wanted to boil it down to one thing, like Charles Darwin, yeah. So we know it's one theory. Albert Einstein, even if we can't really understand relativity theory, we know what idea has to be connected to him. And people try to do this with Humboldt, but with Humboldt it's more difficult. It's more difficult. You can't boil him down to one. As I said at the beginning, you can't even say, he was a famous naturalist, because he was much more than that, yeah? And he was also a science diplomat.
Thank you so much. I concede the point, but I still see many, many, many great snippets for wonderful marketing narratives. As promised, I want to open the floor for questions, comments from the audience. Please, Andreas. Oh, and I guess we need to move you near to the microphone. Sorry, I should have pointed that out. It's standing right here, so. No, here. Oh, right here. Sorry.
I want to put the moral burden a little bit off Chris Hanel's shoulders. Off.
Nice.
I think it's perfectly fine to deliberately and modestly and maybe with a dose of irony use at times labels to attract public attention. And we all operate, be it as scholars or as science managers, in a public sphere. And we want to have people like us and you around, and as long as we give room to the famous 100 flowers we let bloom, then I think it's perfectly fine. But I want to thank you primarily, Sandra, for your beautiful talk, and I think you did a wonderful job sketching Humboldt mediating between and connecting the spheres of politics and diplomacy and kind of meandering between these two fields, each of which has its own logic, of course. But would you dare to share what you think were Humboldt's own political opinions on very specific challenges? After all, he came of age in the decade of the French Revolution. Maybe you want to talk about that, or the Haitian Revolution, topic of slavery. So do you see Humboldt not only as a navigator and mediator, but also someone who, with all due caution, harbored his own opinions and assessments?
Of course, he had his own opinions, and he made them public. So, of course, he had to be careful in a certain context, like, for example, with the He was very thankful to the Spanish crown for having received this really extraordinary permission, so he was cautious what he said and what he criticized. So that's why we can also see, if we compare, for example, his diaries and with his published versions. I have done that in several contexts, and in one article I did it with Cuba. So what is it what he wrote about Cuba in his publications, and what is it what he wrote in his diaries? So yes, there is a difference, and that shows that he knew that he had to be careful. But yes, of course, he had his opinion. It's just that his opinion, like for example, let's say French Revolution, Haitian, or also in Spanish America. Let's maybe stick to Spanish America because this is what he observed more. While he was traveling, he saw the first signs of the discontent in the societies, and he analyzed it. But he analyzed it in a way that I really like it, and this is where I think we can learn from him. This is what I tried to express at the end. So he really always looked at the causes and the consequences. He did not only describe something, let's say, oh, if we have a revolution here, and if the Spaniards are chased out, for example, then this is the problem is solved. No, he analyzes it well, and he comes to interesting conclusions, which he then also expresses more in his diaries and also in his letters to people that he trusted. Yeah, so there is a big difference. And for example, what he said about Spanish America, and this is something that I quote to show that he was not let's say a leader of independence movement. So this is something this is another label that has been created for him. Yeah, why? Because people wanted to connect their causes with Humboldt. So it was the Creole elite in Spanish America. They created this idea that Humboldt was their ideological leader, but he wasn't. So he was very much, in fact, he was very much critical, not only towards the Spanish colonial administration and all the flaws and all the social problems it led to. He also very much criticized precisely the Creole elites. For example, he explains that, and that is what I mean, he got really into depth, yeah, with his analysis. He, for example, he says, well, if the problem will not be solved if the people just limit themselves to chasing out the Spaniards, because then this means that for the lower classes, yeah, for the most, let's say, feeble classes, those classes who have less resources, less influence, for them the situation is going to be worse than in a colonial situation. So that is something that he said it, and he explained it. He also, with much detail, he explains, for example, that in Madrid they had issued, let's say, new laws that would be let's say in favor of people like slaves or people working on plantations or any kind of that would be favorable for them, but it was against the interests of the Creole elites. So they would not put those new laws into practices because it went against their personal or economic interests. So that is again, so he describes the reality in a very nuanced way, yeah, not black and white, yeah, but he explains and gives us, let's say, a rich explanation or a rich inside view of the complications of those times. In general, if I want to summarize the question into one sentence, with the revolutions, he was much more in favor of reforms than revolution. So when he saw something that for him was a problem, something that he favored for a change, then he never thought that out of a bloody revolution there would come something good out of it. And I think he was also influenced by the French Revolution in that sense, because he saw that even if, let's say, if the basic ideas of the revolution can be very, let's say, very valuable or of values that we can identify with, liberty and all that. So of course, but still in this case, the outcome can be very bad, as we know with the example of the French Revolution. And I think this is what influenced him as well. I mean, looking at what happened after the first years of the Revolution. And so that's why he was cautious, and the same was with Haiti as well. So he balanced it very much, and this is what allows us to get an interesting insight on the difficulties and the complex interdependencies of his times.
Are there more questions from the chat? My colleague Ilonka will read it.
I'm just going to read 3 different questions that came in from the chat. The British government or East India Company prohibited Humboldt from going to India. Why do you think the Spanish crown was willing to have him go to its colonies? And was this a bad decision from their point of view? And then the second...
Maybe I
Sure.
first that one. It's a very good question. So Humboldt was very optimistic that he would be able to undertake another big exploration voyage after having carried out his voyage through the Spanish position. So he was quite optimistic about it. In fact, the Spanish crown, they had given him permission also to go to the Philippines, which would have been, because Humboldt from the beginning he had the idea with his comparative view, he wanted to compare the American world with the Asian world. And so he thought, I do it all in one expedition, and then he thought, no, I better focus on America now, and then I leave Asia for later. And over like 20 years, he was optimistic about it, he thought about it, and he tried to network and make it happen, but it would not happen. And there are, let's say, the ultimate reasons we don't know, because there's still, let's say, archives that need to be explored. I have my interpretation, and the interpretation is that, of course, I mean, the normal thing in those times was not to allow a foreign traveler come to your positions, because they not only see, let's say, trees or whatever, or minerals that they can analyze. No, they also see the social conditions, and sometimes you're not really interested in that they see it and that they can make it public. So the normal thing is that you would not allow it. So why did the Spaniards allow it? This is in fact something that I have focused many years on it. I have been focused, so that's a big part of my work, been focusing on Humboldt's connection to the Spanish Empire. I've been living in Spain for decades. And so what I found is that at that moment there was a certain interest also to make, let's say, their precious resources known to the world. Also, for example, about Spanish science, there was a lot of, Spanish science was quite active, yet people did not know about it. So in a way, there was an interest to spread information to the world about the progress in the Spanish colonies, because this is connected with the black legend, the tendency to talk very bad about Spain and its colonies, etc. So that was one interest. Another interest was clearly because Humboldt was a mining inspector. He was an expert in mining. So of course there was an interest in getting information about that. And there was also, let's say, there was a certain. This was a continuation of a contact that had already been established between special German states and the Spanish Empire, because in Germany you had the famous mining school, and people that have been trained there, the Spanish Empire tried to hire them, like even before Humboldt, so that was like continuing this line of tradition. And there is another aspect that I have found, and this is exploring the archives. I found something that's also hardly known, and I describe it in the new book that I'm hoping to publish soon, is so what do you think would have happened if Spain would have said no to Humboldt's request? Where would he have gone? What would have been the next place? Any suggestions? Portugal, Lisbon, so that he would have been trying to get permissions from the Portuguese. And I found that he had already established contact with the Portuguese ambassador, and this would have been the next step. And since Spain and Portugal, they were rivals, so the Spaniards thought, no, we better get him. And that is the reason why the Portuguese then said, well, we have to, they issued an order of capturing Humboldt. They said, should he ever cross over to our territories, then we will capture him and put him in jail. So, but that is the reason for it. So these are some of the reasons why they gave him this special permission. And maybe. With Britain, that was later. That was 20 years later. So maybe they saw that Humboldt has published some things about the Spanish colonies that maybe was not in the favor of Spain, and they tried to avoid that for themselves. And I think that it also contained the question if in Spain, if people were happy about it or not.
Was it a bad decision from their point of view? But I think essentially
I think it was a good
really
decision
well
for them, yeah.
And then there was one more question in the chat on science diplomacy. Could you comment on any other examples of science diplomats, and is anyone creating a best practices treatise on science diplomacy?
Well, I mean, in this context, we bring it to our day, science diplomacy, that I'm really not a specialist so that I could point to current people, but in the historic context, yes, I mean, now, for example, I'm working on Thomas Jefferson, so he had made also big contribution to that. Or he was, let's say, in other words, he connected both pursuits in a different way. So everybody does it in a different way, yeah? Because he, of course, he had political positions. I mean, he had the most important position you could get in this country, yeah? And Humboldt, in his way, he tried to avoid having political position because he wanted to be independent, because that allowed him more to navigate between the interests the way that he considered it to be beneficial, not only for himself, not only for his science, but his larger goal. In a way, his larger goal was the let's say the benefit of the society. He was very much, I mean, he had his enlightened ideas. He wanted to improve things. And for example, at the beginning, when he was working as a mining inspector, then he created a school for the children of the people working in the mines. So that is something that really shows that he had a social engagement as well. Yeah? So it was not just pure science, but much broader than that. Yeah. Do we have another question? Any more questions from the chat? More questions here from the room?
Well, I mean, we can always continue the conversation, of course, over food and drinks. I want to point out already that this is, as I said before, this is the inaugural event of the new program. Mm-hmm. And there will be another event in December, the second installment of the program. I want to point that out because the speaker, Professor Andreas Daum, is with us. He asked the first question. So if you like what we did today, please join us again on December 3rd, when Andreas Daum will talk about how Humboldtian was Alexander von Humboldt. We all use this adjective Humboldtian, and I'm not sure whether we all mean the same thing. How Humboldtian was Alexander von Humboldt, a new look at Humboldt's life. You can pre-register for that event. I don't know where, is that floating around here somewhere?
We can put it on the table.
Yeah, so we will put these on the table. So please also join us on December 3rd, but please come closer again, Sandra. And I want to thank you so much for your time, your insights. This was really a wonderful kickoff of our new series.
Thank you.
Looking forward to continuing the conversation over drinks and food. And please, everybody, join me and let's give Sandra a hand for this great presentation.
So this is not the end of the event. Let's have a glass of wine or whatever, have food, and stay here and continue the conversation. Happy to answer any other questions that you might have.
And for those of you joining us virtually, have a glass at home or wherever you are. Cheers to you. Thanks for being with us today. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.